All right, Samir, let's do this. If you don't mind jumping on audio and video. Samir, hi.
How's it going?
It's going really well. Is that a Zoom background?
No, this is the actual living background.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing. I feel like this is like the new game. Well, welcome and to everyone who's here for the interview. Thank you so much for attending. As a reminder, my name is Andrew Farah. I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called Density. We build systems that help turn buildings and their use into analytics. I'm extremely excited to be here with Samir. I've had a chance to hang out with him earlier this week. I'm hanging out with him again later today. Samir, uh, where do you work? Um, do you love where you work? And what do you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super excited for this conversation. I'm currently working in our extra bedroom based out of San Francisco. So on this side, you see there's a bed, a bookcase, our Peloton. So kind of angled it for best viewing angles. So I have been at Twitter for 7 years, and I lead workplace strategy, design and construction, and recently actually took on our audio visual team. I love where I work because the people at Twitter are next to none. It's a really great place to be, and why I've been here for 7 years, and many more to come.
So, as a reminder to the folks who maybe haven't been to these interviews before, if you have questions, just feel free to toss them in the Q&A, and then I'll work them in kind of naturally into the discussion. So don't hesitate. Nothing's off limits. Samir will dodge if he needs to dodge, but he's been really helpful in prep. So first off, can you give me a sense of scale? What's your total square footage? How many countries are you operating in? And what's your head count?
Yeah, so can't share square footage, but we are in over 30. We have over 35 offices, and we're pretty much represented globally around the world. Very interestingly enough, this past Monday, we announced that we're going to be hiring folks in Ghana, Africa, which is our first entrance into that market, which we're really excited about. So Jack, our CEO, tweeted that on Monday. But besides that, we're pretty well represented in all the major markets around the world that you would expect.
So one of the things that's been really interesting is like there were a number of trends. You've been at Twitter for 7 years. Have you been in and on the real estate or workplace team for that duration?
Yep, ever since the beginning. And I was actually an external consultant to the real estate and workplace team for 3 years before that. So I've been involved with Twitter for actually a decade this year. So it's been a long journey and a very fun one.
That's awesome. And uncommon in the world of startups. So super cool to hear and see. So I guess my question is like agile workplace, hybrid work, hoteling, hospitality, sort of view on space is not new. It's been around for some time. Um, I mean, in some cases, you could even argue it's been around for decades. It's just sort of a question of like adoption and which industries sort of tend to take this up. I'm curious, what percentage of your current headcount is like assigned, like pre-pandemic, and what you think that percentage or how that percentage will change, if at all, as you come back?
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, we were very much, one-to-one assigned seating. Most people came into the office every day if they weren't traveling for work, occasional work from home. I think post-pandemic, we're seeing data from our employees that's very similar to what you're seeing in the marketplace. We expect about 75%-ish to be hybrid, so they'll be coming in ever so often. We'll have a double-digit percentage of full-time remote, and then a really small percentage we expect to be full-time office, mainly based on if their role requires them to be there, think receptionist and other types of roles. We're going to be a mix, I think, of unassigned and assigned, because we recognize that you might have unique needs when you come into the office that can't be, satisfied or provided in a kind of hoteling environment. And so we're not necessarily going fully unassigned. We're still working through the exact details of that, but I would expect that we would still offer for very specific needs the ability to have an assigned desk.
So I'm curious, like, there's this lovely hashtag, love where you work. And I've sort of heard that Twitter tends to incorporate a lot of the local community and sort of flair into wherever an office is built. Um, I'm curious, like you're working from home, you have a non-Zoom background, Zoom background. Are your employees' homes now a part of your workplace strategy? And if so, where are you investing there?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So last year, early last year, the real estate and workplace team at Twitter moved from the finance organization to the people organization, pre-COVID. So it had nothing necessarily to do with that. Timing worked out really well given all the work that needed to be done related to COVID. As part of that transition, also, we actually took on remote experience within real estate and workplace and falls under my organization as part of workplace strategy. Starting way back in 2018, we had started this push to hire more distributed folks, more people around the world, both full-time remote and in other locations than just traditional markets. And so we absolutely think that the home is one of many different locations an employee can work. And we're constantly thinking about the experience as offices open up safely, what that will be if folks are at home, if they're full-time remote, if they're part-time work from home, and what the experience is like in the office, not just for when you're in the office, but for those that aren't in the office and you're trying to work with them, collaborate with them, connect with them, socialize with them. So it's very much an ecosystem for us.
Yeah. Can we actually talk about this, like how you think about experiences, like when you've got folks that are dialing in, folks that are sort of like distributed, folks that are in person? I've heard everything from, hey, we're moving to a remote first, distributed first perspective. How would we think about systems, process, methodology, meeting length, duration, and so forth if we were distributed first? To the opposite, which is, honestly, it seems to be working. We're just going to allow the things to play out sort of organically. I'm curious. And then I guess the last option is there are some types of work that can only happen at work in an office, and there are some types of work that perhaps are more convenient to be able to do at home. You and I were talking about this, but how do you balance? Are you trying to make everything egalitarian? All meetings are sort of the same way. All sort of conversations are as the same, regardless of where you are. Or are you sort of trying to acknowledge the fact that there are differences and then support those? Like, kind of talk me through how the workplace team's thinking about it.
Yeah, I think what we're really focused on, not just as a workplace team, but as a company, is individual choice and flexibility, right? So we really want people to have the ability to choose where and when and how they work. And so when you think about that and then think about the experiences that feed into that, it's really important to think about the behaviors that you want people to emulate when they're working in these different modes. I think one thing many people agree on, and you hear this in the industry, is that as everyone's home, there's a sense of equitable experience, especially in meetings where everyone is kind of on this level playing field of equal box size and stuff, as opposed to when you have conference rooms, even multiple conference rooms dialed in, that you can't necessarily see everyone, or you have some people that are remote, and the experience just isn't great. And so we're really thinking through things like that. So as offices reopen, what are the behaviors we want our employees to think about when they're engaging with other employees across these different locations? And then what are the behaviors? And then what is the technology? So what is the technology that we can help provide that will provide those nudges to make sure that it emulates the behaviors we want? When we think about the office, we don't think it's just for one purpose. We recognize, again, thinking about individual flexibility, that I may need to go to an office for a variety of reasons. I have a 2.5-year-old running upstairs if you hear him. And so focus work is really hard for me at home, right? And so I would go to the office to do that focus work. I think a lot of people talk about the office just being for collaboration and socialization. And I think that's missing a big part of the picture if you inadvertently just assume that home is best for focus, right? I think there's a landscape of what people need.
You mentioned behaviors and technology. What are the behaviors and what is the technology?
Yeah. So I think the behaviors are around, thinking about being inclusive in everything you do, right? So don't forget that if you're trying to collaborate with someone, that there might be someone else on your team that you need to involve. And so how can you do that through technology, whether it's virtual whiteboarding, whether it's conference room technology and making sure it's set up. There's really cool technologies coming out that will like zoom in on people's faces and create like equal grid views and stuff like that. So those are the types of things that we're really excited about and looking into.
Are you open right now?
We have Singapore that's partially open, and we are likely opening Sydney next week. Besides that, most of our offices are closed.
Gotcha. Are people still going in even though they're closed?
No, we've turned off access. So we have a very specific process. And I will say we recognize that in some instances, people really need access to an office space. So we do have an exceptions process that we work through on an individual case by case basis.
What percentage of your employees want to come back to the office?
That's a great question. I don't know if we've necessarily surveyed that outside of the data that I was talking about around hybrid nature. I think if you look at the data that we're getting, we know that people want to come back a couple of days a week, and that was that 75%-ish range that I think you see industry wide. I think I think people miss the office. People miss collaborating in person. We recognize that in a hybrid workforce, it will still be important at a somewhat specific cadence to bring the entire team together, right? You can't fully replicate yet. I'm sure one day we will, all the in-person type gatherings and experiences you can have.
I mean, you could argue that Twitter's been a distributed company as soon as it had 3 or 4 floors, like on Market Street, or wherever its first office was. I mean, I think that um, actually, and I'm curious if you disagree with this, but like, do you think that the world is reckoning with the fact that we're finally acknowledging that if you've got multiple floors inside of an office, you've got multiple offices inside of a region, then you've been running a distributed team for some time. We just have been unwilling to really embrace that. And I'm not saying Twitter specifically. I mean, asking you to kind of comment on the industry more broadly.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. And I think, especially as you open up more offices in different locations, you very naturally start working with people that aren't in your same location. So I definitely agree that there's this, we weren't recognizing it probably as much. It's interesting. I was on a future offices panel a couple of years ago, and this idea of a technology company came up. And I commented that, quite frankly, every company has to be a technology company these days because you need technology to enable your business, whether that's your primary mode of business or whether your service is something else, you need the technology. Very similarly, it is interesting, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of other companies and industries were actually somewhat distributed already. You think about some organizations and their sales forces, right? They never
Right.
went to the office. They would work from home and be traveling all the time, right? I think what we're just seeing now, to your point, is that people are finally realizing that this is now everywhere and it's going to be the future because everyone had to work from home.
Are your teams moving to less expensive regions? I guess maybe my question is uh, to maybe put it more directly, is Twitter going to be supporting fully remote uh, moves from folks that maybe were historically in San Francisco or historically in a major hub in any one of the 35 places where you have offices? Will you support, if I wanted to go to Kuala Lumpur and you didn't have an office there, um, can I go and retain my job, or is there a cost of living adjustment? Do I need to is it dependent based on the team? How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, so we have a very specific process that another team runs within our group, where you apply to basically go full-time remote, and there's a set of criteria. You work with your manager. We're
Mm.
not able to operate in every single country around the world, so there are certain restrictions based on
Yeah.
safety and other things. But
I mean,
I still, yeah,
the tax liabilities that the
yeah,
pandemic has caused are just like
yes.
fascinating.
It is interesting. On the East Coast, I know specifically there's a lot of conversations between the tri-state area around this. We do want to support as much as we can individual choice and flexibility. There are naturally some limitations, but fundamentally, yes, we are trying to allow that with those parameters in mind.
There's a good question from Tracy, who's also been a guest on this, around sort of like the role of your sort of civic duty to local economies. Local economies, San Francisco is no exception to this. Not everybody's a tech company in the heart of San Francisco. There are a lot of extremely small businesses that there are a lot of small businesses, not extremely, but a lot of small businesses that eateries and whatnot that have dropped in visitation dramatically. Sort of curious if the sentiment in Twitter is that the 35 regions that you operate or the 35 offices that you operate now have a larger duty to maybe source goods or source products or engage with, maybe not build cafeterias, for instance. Just sort of curious, like how you're thinking about local engagement with communities.
Yeah, I would say specifically to the real estate and workplace world, and then I can comment just Twitter generally. One thing that I'm really proud of is, I joined it internally in 2014, and you referenced this about local look and feel. One of the other things that we really focused on is supporting local vendors for every single office project that we had. We do not currently have any global agreements with any one company. We don't have any, every time we have to use this vendor. We go to every single market. We find the best vendors that are there. And we really try to find local vendors, small companies that we can support. Diverse suppliers is another big initiative. The other thing that I've really focused with my team on is this idea of sustainability, right? We know the normal lens of sustainability around clean environment and whatnot. But as a company, when you're in a community, you can create a sustainable community by continually investing in that market by the services that you render for your office, whether it's janitorial, food service support, security support, ongoing maintenance and whatnot. And so we really focus and really believe that sustainability can have an impact in creating sustainable communities. We also within Twitter have a huge global program called Twitter for Good, where we partner with local communities and employees partner and give time back each year, a couple of times a year for that. And then we also have other engagements through philanthropy that we have as well.
So you asked, this is maybe a tactical question, but you said that you are sourcing stuff locally from local groups. Totally get that for a variety of categories of products. Does that apply to things like wireless access points?
That's a good question. I do not know the answer to that. That would be a different group. I'm sure that, to a certain extent, there are standards for certain things.
Sure. Access control, for instance.
Yeah, exactly. But I think as much as possible. So even if we bought that hardware, for example, from a major manufacturer, because of what we need technology-wise, we would still hire local integrators to do that work.
Of course.
Of
course. Makes sense. Tell me about the composition of your team. What is, and also what's the current headcount of Twitter?
Yeah, we're about 6,000 plus FTEs right now.
Okay. So to support those 6,000 FTEs, I presume there's a whole bunch of other contractors that fall into sort of Twitter sort of, actually that's a separate question that I have, which I'll get to in a second. For those 6,000, what's the composition of the workplace team? And then what does workplace look like within the ecosystem of the real estate, everybody who touches real estate?
Yep. So we are, I think, 90 plus now globally on the global real estate and workplace team. We have the functions that fall under our real estate and workplace team. And again, this is different at every company. We have a leasing and planning function. We have my organization, which was workplace strategy, design and construction, actually AV, which is really exciting. We have food, beverage, and events. Sustainability actually falls under real estate and workplace as a kind of a center of excellence. So not just real estate and workplace sustainability, but company-wide sustainability initiatives partnering with other groups. And then we have global operations, which are really the backbone of our real estate and workplace team. They're the most distributed. We have almost one person in every office, almost, not quite. And they really interact with the employees on the day-to-day basis, and we interact with them to understand the needs of the business. We
Makes
report
sense.
up, we're in the people team as part of the overall organization.
So it's been a year. A friend of mine sent me a photograph of us doing haircuts on like one another because we couldn't go to the barber a year ago. I still can't go to the barber and I need to, as you can probably see by the hair sort of peeking out by my neck. It's been a year. You've got 90 folks. Your utilization is underneath 1%, I presume, sort of subtracting out places like Singapore that are largely back to work more normally within that region of the world. What do those 90 folks do? And I'm going to incorporate one of the questions that was asked here in preparing for return. Are you making changes, physical changes to the workplace? Are you pulling seats out of conference rooms? Are you kind of doing a bit of a wait and see as you come back and sort of ratchet attendance back up and sort of manage capacities? How are you thinking about what is the work that has been done over this last year? And then what are you doing to prepare as you return?
Yeah, so we have from the beginning had a large COVID-19 task force that is very much built up by members across the company, real estate and workplace playing a pivotal role. Operations very specifically has spent this time, understanding what are the temporary modifications we need to make in order to safely reopen. So like many companies out there, we'll open at a reduced capacity. We've closed certain desks so we can allow for physical distancing, reduced conference room capacities. But what I'm also really proud of our global real estate and workplace team is we recognize that some roles maybe didn't have as much work just naturally because the office was closed. And so we were able to focus a lot of our time on things that we never were able to get to, maybe documenting some standards and processes, creating new standards and processes, flexing people to almost bungee into different organizations to learn a little bit more about whether it was real estate, workplace, or other aspects of the company. So for example, I had a couple of people join my design and construction team to learn how office projects run. So we really took this opportunity to allow people to grow their individual skill sets while of course focusing on making sure that their offices are ready to safely reopen when the time is appropriate.
I mean, because it's been a lot of hurry up and wait,
Yep.
right? Like it was, this will cure itself a year ago. It was end of 2021. It was, probably not until 2022. Then it was like September when schools reopened, and now it's looking like, it keeps like pulling back as vaccine gets distributed. I'm curious how you think about vaccines and we're sort of wandering into the territory of HR. So insofar as you can comment, are vaccines required to come back to the office? Is it after they've been, I heard a great answer, which was like, we're going to wait till everyone sort of had an opportunity to get vaccinated. And then once that's sort of, then we'll say that anyone can come back. Just sort of curious how you're thinking about health and sort of who participates in that and who doesn't.
Yeah, before I answer that, one thing I want to comment on is, given we're a global company, we are looking at this landscape holistically, and we are looking at it globally, but also market by market. So as I mentioned, Singapore's open because they're in a really good spot, thankfully, right now in this moment in time.
Yep.
There are a number of countries around the world that are not in a great spot. Sao Paulo, unfortunately, we have an office there, and Brazil is not doing great. And so we're really focused on making sure that there's a set of criteria that the COVID working group has come up with, that we really evaluate that and think about that and make sure it's consistent, so that there is a process that it's transparent to our employees to understand this is what it will take to safely reopen an office. And so, yes, while in the United States, we've had some locations that look like they might be getting closer, which is great. There are other locations that may not. And so we're really thinking through that and making sure our employees are safe. On the vaccine front, I don't know, to be honest. It's not my purview. What I can tell you is there is a group that's thinking about that, and it's a cross-functional group of key stakeholders across the business that will make that decision.
How do you think this is going to change how people do work?
I think what's interesting to think about is, the flexibility that employees will have, and ensuring that we don't fall back into those old behaviors. I think that's what we're really focused on, right?
Such as
hallway conversations that inadvertently lead people out, right? Like that you need to communicate with. The concept of the conference rooms. Do we need to travel everywhere to get work done, right? You think about that.
Wait. I'm sorry. Hold on. I want to go back to something you just said, because it's a really important thread. I thought that serendipitous collisions, unintended collisions, led to creativity, and that was the function of an office. I thought that was one of the primary things that an office would allow, is these conversations in a hallway. Totally get the concept of trying to create, not leaving folks out from those discussions. But if it's not to facilitate serendipitous collisions, what is the purpose of the office?
Yeah, I think the purpose of an office, to me, is it is one part of a larger ecosystem of where and how you can work. So if the office was as important as maybe we think for those types of moments, I would argue that no company has been innovative over the past 16 months or however many months it's been, right? But I think you've seen a number of new startups starting that maybe aren't in an office and still being creative. Within Twitter, we're still innovating our product and making changes and advances and whatnot. Is it easier or harder? I think this is where technology can play a role to help facilitate those types of things. But to me, an office is an opportunity for someone to have a place to go that maybe is different from their home location or another location, where yes, they can maybe decide to socialize or collaborate, but it's not the only place, and it shouldn't prohibit others from being included, right? When we think about this ecosystem of locations, in an ideal world, it doesn't really matter where you work. You can be great at your job and have fun and collaborate from any location you choose, maybe even Mars if it was up to Elon Musk.
But okay, so I I buy the intent, but practically speaking, we're not talking about robots at the end of cafeteria, you know, tables, sort of, so that everyone can participate in the lunch, are we? I mean, if you are, that's cool. Like if it's robots rolling around, that's awesome. I guess I'm just, I get there's like the aspiration, which is like everyone has access to the same things and that we're not leaving folks out. And then there's the reality, which is like people spend time around a whiteboard, people spend time taking walks, and creativity is culturally dependent, right? Like some organizations have remained maybe more creative and productive and inventive during the pandemic than others. So I guess like talk to me a little bit about the reality, because I totally get the aspiration.
Yeah, I think the reality is that we will as a company still decide those moments where it is important to bring everyone together, right? So the reality is, yes, you can't do this 100% of the time and expect it to be successful. I think there will be certain moments, whether it's a project kickoff or a company-wide type thing or whatever it may be, that you want to bring your group together to align, to collaborate and socialize, and then redistribute. I think what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't need to be every day, right?
Yeah.
You can set up a cadence that is quarterly, yearly, biannually, whatever it is, to pick those moments that's important for your company culture.
And I think the point that you were making was that that there's intentionality behind it. That it's like we are choosing to create space where there's a counterbalance or a counterweight to the serendipitous sort of random things that you can't control for.
Yeah.
Couple of good questions. Do you think that reduced density of people, and I say this not as someone who works at density, this is actually the question. This is actually the question. It uses the word. Do you feel that the reduced density is an employee benefit of the workplace? So, and I want to clarify this because I think I know where Tracy's coming from on this. His question has to do with the ideal state of offices. Well-designed offices are not cram-packed with lots of folks next to each other, right? They tend to have space. They tend to give folks sort of options. They tend to not be sort of next to one another. The pandemic has sort of forced us to like do that, even despite our VPs of finance not liking the fact that we can't fit more, or maybe we work sort of a perspective on 50 square feet per head or something like that. I think was sort of like one of the things that a long time ago they talked about. So is this forcing us to think about improving an employee's experience by reducing the density of folks? Or do you think that this is just a blip and we're going to return back to open floor plan, sea of folks when masks are no longer necessary?
Yeah, I think for Twitter, what we've focused on is the variety of spaces that we've always provided in our offices. So we definitely have some open desking areas, but we've never crammed or tried not to cram 500 people in one giant one, right? We try to create neighborhoods. We try to, provide different areas of working. As for the future, I think it will be interesting to see. I think thinking about the desk specifically, I think it's one mode of working. And I think it'll be interesting to see what the desk actually becomes in the future and how many of those you actually need versus these other spaces, collaborative areas, social areas, focus areas, whatnot. And so I do think companies that are really trying to understand their culture and design space will need to fundamentally understand how their teams work to then determine, is it a desk? Is it a conference room? Is it a lounge? Is it another type of space? And what's the distribution across that? And we're definitely doing that.
So let's talk about, I've got two questions and they're going to lead us in different directions.
Pick the road less traveled, maybe.
The funny thing about that poem is I think that the author's intent is that it doesn't matter.
Right.
But yeah, we'll try to pick the one that's less traveled. I guess talk to me about the difference between data and data informed opinion. You and I were sort of discussing kind of the over reliance on data or maybe over rotation on data. What did you mean by that? And I'm in the data business. You're in sort of the workplace experience business. So if there were one thing you wanted to make sure that I agreed with or understood, what would that be, or didn't over rotate on?
Yeah, I think what's interesting to think about is, when you look at data, especially in the real estate and workplace world, it can be very informative, right? It can tell you how many people you have in your space. It can tell you how much you're paying dollar per square foot. It can tell you how your space is being utilized. I think the thing that we really focus on and make sure is that you don't lose sight that you're talking about people, and people have different needs and different experiences. And so if you over rotate on data saying, oh, this is exactly what the data says, you might actually miss the point of understanding what that data, how that data was produced, how the employees are using it, observing in real time and in person to say, this is what they're doing on that data. This is why they're coming in, right? The data will say you have 75% of your office occupied on Tuesdays. You need to understand why on Tuesdays, right? You need to
Which is
understand those.
also not ever true. I just want to say, like,
That's fair.
coming from the measurement system, I can tell you that there is like
Yes,
no building in office.
25%.
Yeah, 25%, and we're talking pre-pandemic numbers here
Right,
too. Like,
right.
okay, so can you give me some practical examples? So, like, give me an example in which data resulted in maybe a poorer decision, over reliance or over rotation on data results in a poorer decision, and then maybe give me the counter example, which is like, here's where data is either informing or in maybe a practical story-based format.
Putting me on the spot a little bit.
Well, that's the whole interview, is
I
essentially a
know, I
series of putting you
know.
on the spot. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's again around the occupancy data around. So we historically did not have a lot of occupancy measurement in real time, something we're investing in now. And so I think when we looked at our occupancy data before, for example, we would have assigned desks, right? And we would know that we have 80% of our desks are assigned. We did some temporary utilization studies a number of years ago and found that, quite frankly, those desks weren't being used a lot, right? And so I think it is two different sets of data that tell a story that then you have to understand, okay, why are these people not at their desks? Well, we understood that they're actually in meetings more, right? And so it helped inform an opinion on how much space do we really need and how should we use our space for the future.
Yeah. Yeah, you're also making the argument for like the difference between complete data and incomplete data, right? It's
Yes.
like, if this sort of taken in a silo might tell you one thing, which is remove the desks, but this sort of in the context of the fact that there's increased utilization elsewhere tells a different story, which is the desks don't need to go anywhere. We just need to make sure that people have space to meet. Um,
And I think this is fundamentally what a lot of companies are going to learn as they start to reopen, right? I think we're all, to a certain extent, guessing, right? Because a lot of companies haven't gone back yet. Some companies are starting to open. So we're all guessing, right? And so we'll then use that data to make informed opinions while also balancing what we observe in real time in talking with people and focus groups, understanding the needs of the business.
so you touched on what the desk becomes, right? What does it become? And this is where I want to kind of wander into what you imagine for the future. I mean, are we thinking like full haptic suits that like double as sleeping pods, and full 360 degrees range of motion, running? Like, what is the desk become in your opinion? Particularly in a world where you have this uh, well, I guess I'll pause there. What does the desk become, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think the desk becomes one type of workspace that you can choose to work at, right? It's not the only place. And again, it's this variety and tapping into individual choice. So I think what a desk can provide is an ergonomic setup that is very comfortable and allows you to be productive, right? Versus maybe a couch, which is more relaxing if you're lounging and stuff. So I think the desk becomes not the focal point. It becomes one of a suite of location options for employees to pick when they decide to come to the office, which will be their choice.
Was that your 2-year-old? Did I just hear
Yeah,
your 2-year-old?
you did hear
That's
my
okay.
2-year-old.
So I was on a call yesterday, and I remember someone said, I have a 7-month-old, and she does this funny thing whenever she's excited. She sort of like tenses up, throws her arms down, and she just goes, "Wah!" And like, just like, full on belts out. And I apologized for the sound because I'm sure it was loud to the folks I was on. And someone said, this is actually one of my favorite parts of uh, the current circumstances and the pandemic, is getting a glimpse into people's lives. So it's awesome actually to hear your 2-year-old running around. Um, um, if the desk becomes one of many spaces that you can take, isn't that, are you essentially saying in an indirect way that the office is really a hotel? A very nicely appointed hotel that facilitates lots of different work types, but is essentially a large unassigned or temporarily assigned, like rooms, um, space 4 or 5 years from now.
Yeah, can't sleep at the office, so definitely not a full hotel.
Okay,
But
not a hotel. Okay, yeah, great.
I get what you mean. I think it becomes. I don't know if a hotel is the quite right analogy. I also was just thinking as you were saying that kind of a conference center, right? Because you come together. But again, I think it's about this individual choice and flexibility. So in that construct, I could see a hotel being an interesting analogy where it's a nice place to go. You can get amenities and you can get work done, but with people that you know and work with day to day.
Um, how many days a week will you go into the office?
Ooh, this is a fantastic question. I've been toying with this. I definitely miss the team, maybe a couple days a week. I might go full time remote. We'll see. I think it's still up in the air.
Fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I hope there's some folks on Samir's team that this is like new news to on the
Yeah.
call. No, no, I'm just kidding. All right. Well, we're gonna wrap in just a minute or two. If you have any other questions, please toss them in the Q&A. Oh, we've got a got a couple. Okay. Um, so I think a lot of times I've learned that office furniture is a far more interesting problem than, or set of questions than I think a lot of people immediately reach for. So I'm super curious, and so too is some of these folks. Um, you know, are you are you going to be changing your furniture structure? Like, is this the end of the couch? I think is another way of putting it. Like, are you going to put everything on wheels? And that'll actually take us to a bit of some questions around A/B testing in physical space. So let's start with furniture. How are you thinking about your plan around furniture?
Yeah, we've always valued, I think, two things. One is flexibility of our furniture. So yes, being able to adapt it as needed, and two, making sure that it's comfortable. There's a lot of furniture out there that looks nice that when you sit on it is terrible. And so I think we're really focused on those two things. So, I think when we think about the different types of furniture, we think about what's the use case of that furniture and what it needs to provide, and then making sure it satisfies those two things. Is it flexible so that we can modify it easily in the future? And does it provide comfort and make sure that it provides the use case for the employee's needs?
So okay, so A/B testing physical space. Are you gonna like be able to run experiments where it's like you put something out, you see if people vote with their feet, you modify, and if utilization's low, and you see if utilization goes back up? Like, how are you thinking about the interval with which you're toying with this? Because there's a period of time in which distance makes a lot of sense from a safety standpoint, and then there's going to be questions of obviously that's going to change, and it's like, do we revert, do we maintain, or do we experiment? So, can you walk me through how you're thinking about that?
Yeah, I'd say that we are always experimenting in that we always learn from our last office project and we then implement learnings and findings into our new office projects. And we're constantly learning within those projects. But we also do deploy different types of furniture in our office, in some of our offices, and ask for feedback to say, hey, how does this work? What do you think about that? Let us know what you feel, and does this satisfy the need? So yeah, I think it's like for us, it's a constant evolution throughout our projects in learning and kind of implementing those learnings, but also within an office, testing different environments and soliciting feedbacks from the employees.
Cool. Tell me about the future. What what does it look like? Um,
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, and I kind of said this earlier, I feel like there's so much conversation around office and home and this and that. To me, in the future, you can work from anywhere and feel like you are just a part of your company as anyone else in your company. And I think that would be an amazing future because then it's again what me as an individual wants and needs, whether it's for my family or where I choose to live based on what that city is like or where I want to spend my time. And so the location doesn't become a construct of you being successful at your company. the company has allowed you and given you the tools to be successful no matter where you work, and the technology's out there and whatnot.
Samir, I think that's a great place to end. If folks want to learn more about kind of the Twitter team or how Twitter is approaching these, do you have is there any sort of public place where they can go, or is it just connecting with you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say follow our at Twitter REW handle. We'd love to tweet about different things that we're doing across the world, our offices and different initiatives, sustainability and whatnot. And that's the best way to follow us. You can, of course, reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. But like we always say internally, see you on Twitter is the best way to find us.
Well, Samir, thank you so much for the time. To everybody who attended, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We will be back soon, and have a great day.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you all.
See you.